In July this year, Frederick Barker was released from prison after serving 18 years for murdering his wife and her lover. Within a few weeks, he was in trouble again, charged by the police with assaulting a neighbour, Jimmy Dean, and destroying his racing pigeons. Barker's counsel has never appeared in a jury trial before and has been informally assisted by a QC, Mr. Mahoney, who represented Barker at his murder trial 18 years ago and happened to be in court yesterday when the trial began.
The assault, the alleged assault. Mr. Dean, your wife hit you, didn't she?
Oh, by the heck, that's about the best one so far.
His wife hit him? Intentionally?
Accidentally, my lord.
When?
During the course of the row to which this witness is testifying.
I see. Go on.
I put it to you, Mr. Dean, that you were standing to the left of your wife and Mrs. Brown was almost between you.
I don't remember where we were.
Mrs. Brown called your wife a dried-up old fanny.
But she was swearing all the time, yes.
And your wife made to hit her with her fist.
What? My wife? Never.
Did she try to hit anyone?
No, your worship, on my oath.
But Mrs. Brown stepped out of the way and you caught your wife's fist in your eye.
Well, that about takes a candle, that one.
That's not true.
No, your worship, no. Madge was flinging her arms about, flinging herself at Nan. Well, I puts my arm out between them, and the next thing, I get it full in the eye from him.
This incident occurred at 11 o'clock in the morning.
Yes, sir.
And if what you say is true, you had been the victim of an unprovoked and serious assault.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, isn't it likely that if you had been attacked, you'd have gone straight to the police instead of waiting until 6 o'clock in the evening?
Mr. Halliwell, that is not the way to make the point. You're inviting the witness to comment.
I'm sorry, my lord.
Oh, let me help you, Mr. Halliwell. Mr. Dean.
Yes, sir.
You had been the, if what you say is true, you had been the victim of an unprovoked and serious assault.
Yes, your worship.
Oh, why didn't you go to the police straight away? Why wait until 6 o'clock in the evening?
Well, I knew the Bobby was coming that evening anyway.
There you are, you see, Mr. Halliwell.
But it didn't work. I mean, he had an explanation.
Oh, but an advocate is not put out if he doesn't get the answer he wants straight away. He presses on. Mr. Dean, if what you say is true, you had been the victim of insult and outrage, and yet you thought it could wait before you spoke to the police.
Well, that's what happened, sir.
What were the police coming to see you about?
Well, it was about another case, a car accident.
Yes?
Mr. Dean, I put it to you that you would do anything, say anything to harm Mrs. Brown and Mr. Barker now that he lodges with her.
We don't even argue with Madge anymore. We gave it up years ago. All we've done is turn the other cheek.
I've no re-examination, my lord. Does your lordship have any questions?
Yes, I have. Mr. Dean, Mrs. Brown is, I take it, about 70 or thereabouts.
Same age as me, your worship. 74.
Yeah.
That's a lie, Jimmy Dean, and you know it.
Who is that woman?
That's Madge, your worship.
So you're Mrs. Brown, eh? So you're Mrs. Brown, are you?
I suppose I am.
What do you mean you suppose you are?
I call myself Mrs. Lily, but everyone else calls me Mrs. Brown, so I suppose I am Mrs. Brown. I asked a solicitor. He said your name is what everyone knows you by.
Well, now, Mrs. Brown, you mustn't interrupt these proceedings, you know that.
It's just that I couldn't stand his lies no more.
Yes, I can understand that a lady is sensitive about her age.
I'm 75, and he knows it.
75?
1 year more. I were giving him hidings regular till he were 15.
That will do, that will do. Now, Mr. Dean, are you seriously saying that this old lady was about to hit your wife?
Your worship, I've seen Madge Brown stripped to the waist and fight like a man in the street.
You have?
Yes, your worship.
We'll go and sit down again, and you must keep quiet, Mrs. Brown. Mr. Halliwell, are you in intending to call Mrs. Brown as a witness?
Yes, my lord.
Well, what's she doing in court?
I didn't know she was, my lord.
My lord, I find that difficult to credit. I myself saw my friend outside in the corridor conversing with that lady. Of course, I didn't realise then who she was.
Mr. Halliwell was talking to a witness. That's a very serious allegation, Mr. Lotterby.
It is, my lord.
Mr. Halliwell, is that true?
Yes, my lord. She just asked me where court number 1 was. I didn't know who she was.
Mr. Lotterby, Mr. Halliwell, this is no way for counsel to behave. I will see you both in my room.
All stand.
I put it to you, Mrs. Dean, that you would turn a man away on a rainy night rather than have a foreigner in your house.
Well, it's no good being sentimental now, is it?
Do you know if Barker tried to get work?
Not if you ask me. It was paying Madge no rent. They was living off his Jenny Brown's war pension, just like she did with Jack Lilly.
Well, when he did eventually find work with Mr. Stavert in the general stores in the next street, Cypress Street, you influenced Mr. Stavert not to let him even start.
Mr. Halliwell, do you want to ask that question?
Yes, I did. People were soft on Jack Lilly when he first come to Fulchester, and look what happened.
Well, I think it's too late now to withdraw the question, even if you wanted to, Mr. Halliwell.
Yes, my lord, I suppose it is.
Are you going to ask the witness how she influenced the would-be employer?
No, my lord.
However, I now will be asking that question, my lord, in re-examination.
Of course, Mr. Lotterby, I'm in the dark as to what Mrs. Dean did, but I can guess, and if my guess is right, I would not admit your re-examination on that point unless I was absolutely certain that there was clear evidence that the accused knew about Mrs. Dean's interference with his prospective employer. And then, of course, the whole thing would go to establishing a motive instead of merely going to Mrs. Dean's credit. However, we can deal with that problem when it arises, and in the meantime, I'm sure Mr. Halliwell is very grateful to know of your intentions. Yes, Mr. Halliwell.
So Jack Lilly was a foreigner too, Mrs. Dean, and lived with Mrs. Lilly.
Madge Brown, yes. Disgusting. Living off her widow's pension from poor old Danny Brown.
Yes, let us all refer to Mrs. Lilly as Mrs. Brown. She seems to answer to that name. Mr. Brown, I take it, was killed in the First World War.
When he heard about Madge and Jack Lilly, he just went out and got himself killed. The week after.
The week after what?
Well, after he got Mrs. Odgers in my letter, telling him as how Madge was in the orchard and up the clumps with Jack Lilly every night.
This was in 1917?
Yes, your worship.
And that, I suppose, is when the feud started. You've never got on with Mrs. Brown since that day.
Well, if you ask me, she's balmy living next door in all that stinking rubbish and accusing us of smelling. Accusing us of pinching her garden. Accusing me of trying to go with Jack Lilly, her who went off with Jack when her own husband were at the war. Accusing us of trying of poisoning her stinking Tom.
Tom? Oh, Mrs. Brown accused you of poisoning her cat.
She always swore she'd get equals with us, but we didn't poison it. Well, not deliberately. It ate some rat poison. Well, everybody were using it because her filthy rubbish brought the rats. Or rat bag, they used to call her down the street.
When was the cat poisoned?
Well, the day before Jenny Odgers had her baby.
Yes, I'm sure, Mrs. Dean, that everybody in Edgar Street knows when that was, but I'm afraid we don't.
Well, 6 months back.
Ah.
He's sitting up now.
Yes?
Mrs. Dean, on Monday, the 26th of August, you and Mrs. Brown got into another row.
Well, she was throwing bread in our front garden.
And in the course of that row, she called you a dried-up old fanny.
I expect she did. She called me most things.
And as a result, you made to hit her.
Don't you tell me what happened. I were there.
You didn't make as if to hit her.
Definitely not. She went to hit me, and my Jim put up his hand to stop her, and he punched him in the eye.
No, Mrs. Dean, it was you who hit your husband in his eye. I put it to you.
Now, what would I want to do a thing like that for?
I didn't say you wanted to do it.
Well, as you don't not, young man. Now, I've had in as much cheek as I can take from you young people.
Mrs. Dean, just answer the questions.
I am.
It's an accident. You were trying to hit Mrs. Brown.
If I were ever trying to hit Madge Brown, it would have been on our 5th anniversary, when she told my Jim that I'd asked Jack Lilly up the clumps.
Just a minute. The clumps?
The clumps.
What are the clumps?
Well, it was woods then. They're all houses now, of course.
Yes, Mrs. Dean, I wish you'd just answer the question simply, or try to stick to what is relevant.
Relevant? I'll tell you what's relevant.
Mrs. Dean, this is my court, not yours. It is I who will decide what is relevant, not you.
Well, I'm not answering any more questions today. I'm going home.
Mrs. Dean, you are a witness in this trial, and you will remain here until I say that you can go.
I'm not feeling well. I'm going home.
Oh, get her a glass of water.
And as a result of what emerged during my friend's cross-examination of Mrs. Dean, I caused some inquiries to be made, my lord. It appeared there was further material evidence, and so I caused the notice of additional evidence to be served upon my friend. Your lordship also has a copy, I trust?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lotterby, I have. I take it you don't object to this additional evidence, Mr. Halliwell?
No, my lord, I don't think it can be objected.
No, nor do I. It's an odd fact. It seems that I can't understand why this evidence was not known to the prosecution until your cross-examination of Mrs. Dean. In the circumstances, I think we must allow them to call this witness. Yes, Mr. Lotterby?
I'm obliged, my lord. I call Mr. Stavert. Mr. Stavert, you are the proprietor of a general store at 11 Cypress Street, Fulchester?
Correct.
Do you know the accused, Frederick Barker?
Yes. He applied for a job I was advertising.
What job was that?
Generally assisting in the shop. I need someone strong to help with the heavy work. I got a bad back.
Would you like to sit down?
No. Thank you. I'm all right as long as I don't have to lift anything.
And did you take him on?
Well, I told him he got the job. But then I heard that...
Don't tell us what you heard for a moment. Now, when was he to start work?
The Tuesday, straight after Bank Holiday.
And did he come in that day to start work?
Yes, I told him I'd changed my mind.
Did you tell him why?
Not straight away. Least said the better as far as I was concerned.
But in the end you did?
Yes.
Someone had told you something about him?
Yes.
Did you tell the accused who that person was and what it was you'd been told?
Not at once, but he kept on at me, so I told him so as he'd go away.
Who was that person?
Mrs. Dean.
Mrs. Dean. And what was it that she had told you?
Well, you know.
We don't know, Mr. Stavert. Tell us exactly what she said.
Only that he was a sex murderer, that he'd done 18 years for killing 2 kiddies.
Did the accused say anything when you told him that Mrs. Dean had said he was a sex murderer?
Yes. He said they've had it coming to them and now they're going to get it.
They've had it coming to them and now they're going to get it?
Yes.
Was he calm or angry when he said that?
He was shouting.
What happened after that?
He just walked out of the shop, slamming the door.
That was the last you saw?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Stavert. Will you wait there?
Mr. Stavert, I put it to you that until Mrs. Dean told you Barker was a sex murderer, you had no qualms about employing him.
Well, to tell you the truth, I'd had me doubts. There was a lot of rumours about him, but I didn't know whether to believe them until Mrs. Dean came round.
Why did you believe her?
Because the police told her.
She told you that?
Yes.
Does it concern you having Barker living in the next street? Would you rather he went away or was put away?
Well, it's not a question of not giving a dog a chance. I've got 2 kids to think about.
You haven't answered my question, Mr. Stavert. Would you rather he went away?
Yes, I would. They got no business to let him out.
The truth is, Mr. Stavert, Barker was released from prison at the end of July after serving 18 years, not for murdering 2 children, but for murdering his wife and the man he found in bed with her.
Oh, well, that's a bit different, isn't it?
Not what you properly call a sex murder, is it?
No, but I only said what I was told.
Do you still say Barker said the Deans had it coming to them and now they're going to get it?
Yes.
I put it to you, Mr. Stavert, that's quite untrue.
No. He was shouting. You can understand that.
You invented that alleged threat to get rid of a sex murderer in your midst.
You're saying I'm a liar?
Yes, Mr. Stavert, and that you're not man enough to tell the truth, even when you know that Barker is not the creature that you thought he was.
Mr. Stavert, have you been lying to this court?
No, sir.
Everything you have told us is the truth.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Stavert. Does your lordship have any questions?
Yes, Mr. Stavert, you thought that Barker might be a violent and dangerous man.
Yes, sir.
And to you he'd threatened the Deans.
Yes, sir.
Did you tell the Deans or go to the police?
No, sir.
I see. Yes, you may go. You needn't stay unless you want to.
I call Constable Edgley.
I said to the accused, I'm investigating a serious assault this morning upon Mr. Dean next door. Mr. Dean says that you punched him in the eye. Is that true?
Did he say anything?
Yes, sir. He said there was a row between Mrs. Lilly and them. Mrs. Dean went to hit Mrs. Lilly, and she hit him instead, sir.
Yes. Can you refer to Mrs. Lilly as Mrs. Brown? She seems to accept that name.
Yes, my lord.
Was that the end of the interview?
No, sir. I said, so in other words, it was an accident and you had nothing to do with it. He said, that's the truth. I then said, this matter will be reported to my superiors for their consideration. I then terminated the interview, sir.
So the accused knew by the end of that interview that the Deans had made a complaint about him to the police?
Yes.
And the following night, Mr. Dean's pigeons were slaughtered?
Yes, sir.
Did you subsequently see the accused again?
I did, sir. As a result of information received, on Wednesday the 28th of August, I went to Mr. Dean's house, number 16 Edgar Street. He took me to the garden, into a shed where I saw a number of dead racing pigeons. On examining them, I observed that some had been strangled and that others had been killed with a blunt instrument, sir.
Did you notice anything else, officer?
Yes, sir. I found a wheel brace.
May the witness be shown Exhibit 3, please.
Yes, sir, that's the brace. It had on it traces of blood and feathers. I took it away for analysis.
My lord, the results of these analyses are not disputed by the defence. The accused's fingerprints were on the brace, is that right?
Yes, sir. The handle had been wiped, but carelessly, so that the one fingerprint remains, sir.
And the blood was found to be pigeon's blood?
Yes, sir. That fact, together with the feathers, suggested that it was most probable that the brace had been the blunt instrument used in the killing.
Yes. When did the results of these analyses come through?
On Friday the 30th, sir.
And what did you do when you got them?
I went to see the accused again, sir, that afternoon in Edgar Street. I said to him, I'm making inquiries into the destruction of Mr. Dean's racing pigeons. I want to ask you some questions about them. I then cautioned him and said, did you have anything to do with it? He said, no, I know nothing about it. I said, how can you explain how your fingerprint came to be on the wheel brace that was used on them? He made no reply, sir.
He gave no explanation for the fingerprint?
No, sir. I then arrested him and took him to the police station where he was charged. He was released on bail the same day, sir.
Charged an officer with what offence?
Sorry, sir, both offences, the assault and the criminal damage.
Yes. Now, finally, did you see the accused again on the 7th of September?
Yes, sir, I was on duty in Edgar Street when he approached me. He said, I'm tired of all this. I did effing Dean and his effing pigeons. He had it coming.
So he admitted both offences?
Yes, sir. I said, do you want to make a statement? He said, no, you've got all you need now. Let's leave it at that. I then terminated the interview, sir.
Thank you, officer.
Officer, the fingerprint. You've no way of knowing when that was imprinted on the wheel brace. It could have been imprinted quite innocently when Barker used it to change a wheel.
He didn't give me that explanation, sir.
Officer, you've told us of 3 interviews with the accused. One on the 26th of August, one on the 30th of August, and one on the 7th of September.
Yes, sir.
You haven't told us so far that you also saw him on each occasion, every single day, between the last 2 interviews.
That's correct, sir.
You did see him every day between those last 2 interviews?
Yes, my lord.
And on each one of those occasions, you went to Mrs. Brown's house in Edgar Street and asked the accused if he had anything to tell you.
Yes, sir.
To which, on each occasion, he answered no.
Correct, sir.
You were harassing him.
That wasn't my intention, sir.
What do you call it, then?
Well, I just thought he might have changed his mind, that's all.
Decided to make a statement?
Yes, my lord.
Yes.
Of course, you knew all along the accused had a record.
I found out who he was about a week after he arrived in Fulchester, yes, sir. And then I decided to keep an eye on him.
Why?
Well, you know, Edgar Street, my beat, all that, sir.
Yes?
I believe I'm allowed to say all I know, my lord.
Yes, Constable.
I just thought that with his record, I'd better keep an eye on him for a bit.
Indeed. When you saw him on the 26th of August about the pigeons, you opened the interview by saying, "I know who you are, forget-me-not."
I've no note of that, sir.
I put it to you that you said it.
I may have done, sir.
Forget-me-not, is that some sort of nickname?
It was the name given to the murders, my lord.
Oh, back in 1956?
I believe so,
Why?
yes, my lord. I think it was that the bodies had been decorated with forget-me-nots, my lord.
Yes, I think I remember now, yes.
The fact is, officer, that whatever words you used, you made it clear that you knew Barker's record.
I believe I did, yes.
Indeed, you told Mrs. Dean that he was a sex murderer.
No, sir. I told her that he was a double murderer.
Not a sex murderer.
No, sir.
So what Mrs. Dean told Mr. Stavert was either something she'd invented herself or just the natural distortion that comes from gossip.
I suppose so, my lord.
Yes.
I put it to you that when you saw him on the 30th about the pigeons, you said that you knew he'd done it, so why didn't he come clean?
I've no note of that, sir. But I did say words to that effect.
And then you visited him every day for a week.
Yes, sir.
And then he made some sort of admission on the 7th of September.
Yes, sir.
But you didn't take him into custody.
No, sir, he was on bail. There was no reason to take him in.
And when he observed that, he remonstrated with you, didn't he? He said, "Aren't you taking me in?"
I've no note of that.
Never mind that, Constable. Did he say it?
Yes, my lord, I believe he did.
He was disappointed he wasn't being taken into custody.
I don't know about that, sir.
Well, he said to you, "I'm not doing any good out here. Take me in and get it over."
I believe he did, yes, sir.
In fact, Barker made a false confession in the hope that he could go back to prison.
Yes, well, I don't think the constable is competent to answer that, Mr. Halliwell. Have you any more questions?
No, my lord.
Officer, can you remember exactly what you said when you told the accused that you knew he'd done it?
My lord.
No, Mr. Halliwell, I don't think you can object. This arises out of your cross-examination.
My lord, it may be highly prejudicial.
So be it. It arises out of your cross-examination. Yes, Constable.
Yes, my lord. I said to him, "I've been reading about the forget-me-nots. This business with the pigeons is a carbon copy. You strangled your wife and killed a lover with an iron bar."
The case of the Queen against Barker will be concluded tomorrow in the Crown Court.